Harlem, New York. 1970. The city breathed jazz, violence, and heroin in equal measure. At the heart of this neighborhood forgotten by the American dream, one man achieved the unthinkable, building a drug empire so vast it humiliated federal authorities. His face, elegant and defiant, appeared on the cover of the New York Times magazine. When that issue landed on President Jimmy Carter's desk, his reaction was immediate. If we can't arrest this man, then something is wrong with our justice system. That man was known as Mr. Untouchable. His real name, Leroy Nicky Barnes. Leroy Barnes was born on the 15th of October, 1933, in Harlem, a neighborhood marked by poverty, discrimination, and racial tension. His childhood was far from innocent. His mother, a humble housewife, endured the abuse of an alcoholic and violent father. Barnes would later recall how that man always had money for whiskey and expensive suits, but never for rent or food. The beatings were so frequent that young Leroy began seeking refuge in the streets. At 9 years old, his destiny was already twisted. Alongside a friend, he worked as a shoeshine boy when a drunken customer asked for a polish. After finishing, the man opened a wallet stuffed with bills. The sight of the money clouded Leroy's judgment. Without hesitation, he snatched the bills and ran. But freedom didn't last. Police caught him just a few blocks away. That arrest would be the first of many, marking the beginning of a criminal career that would one day make him one of the most powerful drug traffickers in the United States. The arrest of that 9-year-old boy was only a prelude. The street, with its codes and brutality, became Leroy Barnes's true home. One day, while helping to clean at home, he stumbled upon a discovery that would change his destiny forever: a bag full of white powder. Intrigued, he assumed his father had hidden it to make money. Without hesitation, Leroy took a small amount and sold it on the street that same day. Easy money was tempting, and, curiously, his father never even noticed the loss. Soon after, Barnes had his first encounter with a firearm. Harlem, in his memory, might have seemed like a paradise, but the reality was different. Youth gangs controlled the streets, fought over corners, and violence was part of daily life. Leroy joined one of them. One afternoon, upon returning home, domestic violence once again broke through his door. His father, enraged, threatened his mother. Leroy, only 12 years old, shouted, demanding he leave her alone. The response was a fist raised in his direction. In a desperate act, the boy lifted the homemade pistol he had obtained on the street and fired. The shot was weak, more noise than harm. The bullet barely grazed his father's jacket, but that moment sealed a decision. Barnes swore he would take revenge. With the help of his gangmates, he tracked down his father's night job. One night, they surprised him alone. Although at first, they planned to kill him, they ultimately limited themselves to threatening him. Shortly afterward, Barnes Sr. disappeared from the family's life forever. But his father's departure did not change Leroy's path. If anything, it solidified it. He was now determined to fully embrace the criminal way. Together with a friend, and after trying cocaine for the first time, they devised a risky plan: rob a small neighborhood dealer. The friend had visited the dealer the day before, pretending to buy drugs, and noticed he was alone and unprotected. Confident, the two teenagers prepared for the hit. The plan was simple: break in, intimidate, rob, and leave without a trace. But as often happens in the careers of novices, the execution failed. When Leroy and his friend entered the dealer's apartment, adrenaline dictated every move. Gun in hand, they demanded money and merchandise. But they missed a fatal detail. They had left the door open. The shouting drew neighbors. A curious crowd began to gather in the hallway, whispers turning into a clamor. Chaos erupted. While his friend fled through the corridor, Barnes found himself cornered. With no other way out, he jumped out the window. Below, 3 police officers were patrolling the area. With almost supernatural luck, he managed to escape before being caught. That episode did not dissuade him. On the contrary, in the streets of Harlem, his figure was beginning to stand out. Not because of successful robberies, but because of his presence. Unlike other boys on the corner who squandered their money on drugs, Leroy invested every dollar in expensive clothes, Italian shoes, and tailored suits. His flashy style did not go unnoticed. A local drug dealer, known as Fat Herbie, took notice. Beyond the elegance, he saw in Leroy an uncommon ambition and offered him work as a courier. At first, the assignments were simple, carrying small packages of heroin between neighborhoods. But as Barnes completed each task with efficiency and discretion, Herbie began entrusting him with riskier jobs. With money also came addictions. Heroin, mixed with cocaine for a stronger effect, became his daily routine. Soon, even Herbie's payments were not enough. At night, Barnes broke into parked cars, searching for anything of value to sell and fund his habit. The street does not forgive desperation. During one of those robberies, he was arrested. The verdict, 3.5 years in prison. But prison, unexpectedly, became his salvation. During the 1.5 years he spent behind bars, he managed to detox. And there, within concrete walls, he made a decision that would shape his fate, never to use again. From now on, he would devote himself exclusively to business. Upon regaining freedom, he refused to return to work for Fat Herbie. Instead, he formed his own group with trusted friends. To finance their first major heroin purchase, they didn't hesitate to break into houses, threatening residents to get cash and valuables. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Barnes' crew knew no limits. In every robbery, they took everything of value, from jewelry to appliances. During one assault, they even forced an elderly woman to remove her mink coat. It wasn't cruelty. Barnes later justified. It was business. That coat could finance our first big purchase. With the loot gathered and a new car for discreet movement, they took the next step, securing a steady supplier of quality heroin. The goal was clear: to build a solid business, not just a corner street operation. Barnes operated with almost military discipline. He never kept drugs at home longer than absolutely necessary. Each morning, he divided the heroin into individual doses, sealed them in small bags marked with black tape, a distinctive signature that soon became synonymous with quality in Harlem, and hid them in strategic locations for his distributors to pick up. As a former addict, he understood better than anyone what his customers wanted: purity, potency, and trust in the product. His heroin was less diluted than the competition's, and that quickly made it famous. Addicts from all over the city began seeking out the black tape. Barnes no longer worked the streets himself. He had delegated sales to a network of dealers and now moved with a bodyguard, more a symbol of status than real protection. The young man from Harlem was becoming a figure of respect and envy. But while his business prospered, the threat did not come from rivals or the police. It came from within his own home. His wife, Nita, was engaged in a casual conversation with a childhood friend, unaware that this innocent moment would unleash a chain of fatal events. Between laughter and memories, the friend asked with curiosity, "Is it true that your husband is that Nicky Barnes? Do you think he could get me some powder?" Nita, who was no stranger to the source of the family's fortune, replied without much thought, "Loyalty is a rare luxury in the world of crime." And Nicky Barnes was about to discover it in the most painful way. Days after that conversation, a team of agents stormed his apartment. They searched every corner, hoping to find enough drugs to lock him away for life. But Barnes, always cautious, never stored heroin at home. Even so, the cash, scales, and packaging materials left no doubt for the prosecution. Barnes was neck-deep in the business. The verdict came quickly: 5 years in Green Haven Correctional Facility, not far from Harlem. What seemed like misfortune turned into an opportunity. Within the walls of Green Haven, Barnes met Matthew Madonna, a member of the Lucchese crime family, serving a 20-year sentence for murder. Madonna was not just any trafficker. He was part of the machinery of the French Connection, the international network that supplied heroin from Marseille to the United States. The bond between them was almost immediate. Two men from different worlds, but with a common language: the drug trade. Barnes shared his frustrations about the dangers of street dealing, while Madonna revealed secrets about how the Italian Mafia managed trafficking on an industrial scale. The French connection had its roots in post-war France. In the port city of Marseille, the Guerini brothers, local mob bosses, struck an unthinkable deal with the CIA. In exchange for helping suppress communist strikes that threatened exports to Europe, the mobsters received money and weapons. Once their power in the port was consolidated, they began importing opium from Indochina, processing it into heroin, and exporting it to the United States. That pact between gangsters and intelligence agencies not only rewrote the rules of organized crime, it also gave Barnes a vision of how to take his empire to the next level. In Green Haven, while most inmates merely counted the days, Nicky Barnes was crafting a plan. Once free, he would no longer be just another Harlem dealer. He aspired to become the architect of a criminal organization as efficient as the Cosa Nostra. At Green Haven, Barnes did not only learn about the French connection, he learned about family. He watched with a touch of envy how Matthew Madonna's friends and relatives visited him in groups, bringing children and home-cooked meals, as if the mobster were at a family gathering rather than in a maximum security prison. Leroy, on the other hand, received no visits. That contrast left a deep mark on him. He realized that the true strength of the Italians lay not only in money or violence, but in their unbreakable loyalty and their ability to operate as a unit. Before his release, Madonna made him an offer: to become the partner who would distribute his heroin in Harlem. Barnes accepted without hesitation. On his release, Frank Madonna, Matthew's brother, handed him half a kilo of heroin and $2,000 in cash. With this capital, Barnes bought a car and rented a discreet apartment, which he turned into his first stash house. Frank didn't just supply merchandise. He also gave strategic advice. When a rival dealer, Steve Austin, tried to sell on the same streets as Barnes, he was ready to settle the conflict with bullets. Frank stopped him. "Your customers don't care who's the toughest. All they care about is product quality. And in that, you already win." It was a lesson in pragmatism. Barnes gave up the territory and moved to another neighborhood. Soon, addicts followed the trail of his superior heroin, forcing Austin to withdraw. Frank also insisted on an essential survival rule. Barnes had to stay away from drugs, not touch them, not package them. Everything had to be delegated. From distribution to security, every task was in the hands of trusted employees. He even imposed an internal code: never discuss business on the phone. Barnes was convinced the police were listening to every call, and he wasn't wrong. It was the birth of a new kind of criminal organization in Harlem. Meticulous, efficient, relentless. Barnes' paranoia about wiretaps was not unfounded. In January 1965, the police intercepted a conversation between Reggie, one of his trusted men, and a contact. Reggie's phone was tapped, and the raid soon followed. Barnes was arrested in Reggie's apartment, where agents found heroin ready to be packaged. The seizure amounted to $500,000 worth of merchandise. It was the blow that the Bronx District Attorney and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics had been pursuing for years. Despite his lawyer's efforts to nullify the arrest by claiming illegal wiretaps, the jury was not swayed. The verdict: guilty of drug possession. The sentence: 15 years in Green Haven, the same prison he had left just 3 years earlier. This time, Barnes found prison different. He distanced himself from his old Italian contacts, including the Madonnas, and sought new influences. He gravitated toward other African American inmates and began taking an interest in African history and resistance movements. At that time, the Nation of Islam was gaining strength in U.S. prisons. For many black men, it represented a way to reclaim dignity and purpose in a system that had marginalized them since birth. Leroy adopted its precepts. He gave up drugs, alcohol, and even pork. He swore never to use again. His transformation was so profound that even his former Italian associates viewed it with irony. But in Greenhaven, there was one Italian who did not follow the usual rules of racial separation. Joe Gallo, known for defying the Cosa Nostra itself, became an unexpected ally for Barnes. Gallo, ostracized by other mobsters, reached out to African American inmates and often defended them against hostility. Through conversations about literature and philosophy, an unlikely friendship was born. Gallo spoke of Sartre and Machiavelli, authors Barnes would later quote in the years to come as he built his criminal legacy. Within the walls of Greenhaven, the discussions between Leroy Barnes and Joe Gallo became a ritual. They talked about everything: power, loyalty, and literature. Sartre, Machiavelli, and above all, the idea that the end justifies the means began to take root in Barnes. Rumors in the prison suggested that Gallo, marginalized by the Cosa Nostra, even considered becoming Barnes's heroin supplier after his release. But this was never confirmed. What is certain is that, according to some accounts, Gallo pulled strings to have his family's lawyer help secure Barnes' release. Barnes, however, told another story. Years later, he claimed that it was he himself who discovered the legal loophole that got him out of prison. He spent hours in the prison library reading criminal law journals when he came across a landmark case, Katz versus United States. Charles Katz, a bookmaker, was under FBI surveillance. Agents had installed a microphone in a phone booth near his apartment and recorded his conversations without a warrant. Although Katz was initially convicted, his defense successfully appealed, arguing that the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution protection against unreasonable searches and seizures had been violated. The higher court ruled in Katz's favor. It determined that even a phone booth was constitutionally protected private space. That decision set a historic precedent. For Barnes, the discovery was a stroke of luck and a sign of his growing legal cunning. His lawyer used the Katz case as the central argument in the appeal. The strategy worked. After serving less than 4 years of his 15-year sentence, Barnes regained his freedom. But the man who walked out of Greenhaven was not the same as the one who had entered. He now had a new creed, a broader vision, and an even more dangerous ambition. Nicky Barnes was ready to reclaim Harlem and more. In less than 4 years, Nicky Barnes left prison a new man, a man with a plan. Inspired by his conversations with Joe Gallo and the teachings of the Italian Mafia, Barnes envisioned a criminal structure that would eliminate street rivalries and function like a true corporation. Thus was born the Council, a board of directors made up of 7 men, all with Barnes' absolute trust. The members: Joseph Hayden, Wallace Rice, Thomas Foreman, Ismail Muhammad, Frank James, Guy Fisher, and Barnes himself. Several were former addicts who, like him, had managed to escape the abyss and reinvent themselves as crime entrepreneurs. The model was simple but effective. Heroin arrived through the Italians, who would leave cars loaded with up to 100 kilos of merchandise in a Manhattan parking lot. Days later, they would pick up the same car, with the trunk full of cash. Each shipment cost Barnes $2.5 million. The production chain was efficient and ruthless. The drugs were taken to rented apartments, where teams of women worked for 2 days packaging 141,000 doses. Then, a full day of thorough cleaning to erase any trace. Each worker received up to $115,000 for her labor, an incentive that guaranteed total silence. A single dose the New York Quarter sold for about $70 on the street. A full shipment could yield up to $10 million in profits. Barnes applied business principles, quality control, impeccable logistics, and an aggressive expansion policy. His product, famous for its purity, reached Baltimore, Philadelphia, and even Canada. Harlem became his headquarters, but his influence spread like a shadow across the East Coast. For many, Barnes was a symbol of success. For others, the man who turned an already battered neighborhood into an epicenter of addiction and despair. At the height of his empire, Nicky Barnes was more than a man. He was a corporation, a brand, a myth. The Council controlled every corner of New York. Guy Fisher dominated the South Bronx. Ismail Muhammad, Frank James, and Wallace Rice divided the East Side. Barnes and Joseph Hayden held Harlem's heart. Each leader had a deputy, and each deputy supervised dozens of mid-level distributors. Each of those, in turn, managed at least 40 street vendors. The total number of people involved in the network ran into several thousands. Summer 1973. After selling 200 kilos of heroin, the council made a record profit, $20 million. Soon, the business surpassed New York's borders. Dealers from Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Oakland traveled to Harlem to stock up. By 1976, the organization could rightly be called international. Its heroin was even reaching Canada. Barnes lived like a king without a crown. Tailor-made suits, 300 inches total, 50 leather coats, 100 pairs of shoes. In his garage, a Bentley, a Citroën SM, a Maserati, a Mercedes-Benz, 300 Cell, several Cadillacs, and a yellow Volvo, he used to go unnoticed. But luxury came at a price. He knew his car fleet would attract the tax authorities' attention, so he created a network of shell companies that, on paper, leased him the vehicles long-term. Not everything was selfishness. Barnes also cultivated an image as a benefactor, donating turkeys at Thanksgiving, gifts at Christmas, and support for single mothers. During Harlem Weeks, he paraded as a magnate proud of giving something back to his community. Yet behind this apparent prosperity, Harlem was collapsing. Between 1970 and 1974, the number of heroin addicts in the United States doubled. And Harlem was the starkest illustration of that statistic, a neighborhood turned ghetto, with broken families and streets full of despair. Barnes justified it coldly. If I hadn't done it, someone else would have. Italian, Latino. And you can be sure none of them would have given a dime back to Harlem. But the echo of his success reached the highest levels. In 1971, President Richard Nixon declared at the White House, "Drug addiction is the #1 public enemy of the United States." And on the target list, Nicky Barnes held a prominent place. Drug addiction is the #1 public enemy of the United States. With those words, in 1971, President Richard Nixon declared war on drug trafficking, a total offensive. But while strategies were being drafted in Washington, the reality in New York was different. Not even the harshest laws could stop heroin's advance. Governor Nelson Rockefeller proposed the most aggressive solution up to that point: the sale of just 2 ounces of heroin, cocaine, morphine, opium, or marijuana carried a sentence of 15 to 25 years in prison. Possession of 4 ounces or more, the same penalty. But the iron fist failed. The streets were still flooded with white powder, and Barnes couldn't help but laugh at the authorities' apparent blindness. According to him, the problem didn't start in poor neighborhoods, but within the police departments themselves. If they really want to end drugs in New York, they should arrest their detectives first. Everyone knows they're the ones selling. He wasn't entirely wrong. In 1972, a scandal shook the city. During an inventory in a police evidence warehouse, officers discovered that suitcases, once filled with heroin, seized a decade earlier during the French Connection investigation, now contained only flour and starch. Who had stolen the drugs? When? No one ever knew. The only suspect, Detective Joseph Nunziata, was found dead in his car. The official version: suicide. But in the streets of Harlem, another rumor spread. Nunziata had been silenced with a bullet. While the police tried to clean their own house, Nicky Barnes kept expanding his empire, convinced he was untouchable. But his name was starting to resonate beyond Harlem, drawing the attention of the press and President Jimmy Carter. Nelson Rockefeller's iron fist went even further. From September 1973, any dealer caught red-handed faced life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For many, even New York's Mayor John Lindsay, this was excessive. In Harlem, whispers said it was a conspiracy against the little guys, the corner sellers who couldn't defend themselves. The only way to silence the critics was to capture a big fish, someone who symbolized the true sharks of the business. And the press became the weapon of choice. Days after the law came into effect, The New Yorker published an article titled The Untouchables, 11 Key Names in the City's Drug Trade. Among them, one stood out above all others, Nicky Barnes. In New York, some people paid to get on the cover of a newspaper. We got published for free. Other outlets followed suit. Headlines were sensational. Nicky Barnes and the Black Mafia. Some journalists even invented that Barnes was linked to terrorist organizations like the Symbionese Liberation Army. Barnes didn't seem bothered. In fact, he enjoyed the attention. Newspapers want to sell. Which cover sells more? An elegant guy in a designer suit, or some dealer with a face not even his mother can stand? And so, with every article, every stolen photo, the myth was born. Nicky Barnes was no longer just a kingpin. He was Mr. Untouchable. August 1973. Nicky Barnes was returning from Detroit, where he had met with his lawyer. Upon landing in New York, he expected to find his wife at the airport, but she wasn't there. 93. Worried, he called her. "There's no electricity in the building, Nicky. The elevator isn't working. I'm not walking down 13 flights in the dark with a baby in my arms." With studied calm, Barnes reassured her. "Stay where you are, honey. I'll grab a cab and be home soon." That night, after comforting his family, he went back out for business. But when he returned the next day, hell awaited him. 15 police officers were waiting in the lobby of his building. Without a word, they handcuffed him and escorted him up to his 13th floor apartment. The officers seemed convinced they would uncover a drug lab or piles of hidden cash. Instead, they found Barnes's wife, terrified, nursing their daughter. The search began. Rooms, drawers, furniture, everything was checked. Finally, an officer emerged from the bedroom holding a leather travel bag. Seeing this, Barnes felt his stomach tighten. "They're going to plant a couple kilos of heroin inside," he thought. But no. The bag contained only documents and dirty laundry. The loot from the raid was meager. $50,000 in cash, a few legally registered guns, and the butt of a joint left behind in the bathroom. Not exactly the big bust the officers had expected. While Barnes was in Detroit, the police believed he had fled to the Caribbean islands to evade the Rockefeller law. They had been tapping his home phone for weeks. Even the phrase he used to reassure his wife, "Stay calm, honey," was interpreted as a secret code. When surveillance agents saw him arrive by taxi, suitcase in hand, and climb 13 flights of stairs on foot due to the blackout, they became convinced he was hiding something big. But the raid turned out to be an empty show. For Barnes, it was a sign. The state, the police, and the media had made him a target. And although he still felt untouchable, cracks were beginning to appear. For the police, every move Nicky Barnes made was suspicious. His return by taxi from the airport, a leather suitcase in hand. His climb up 13 flights of stairs in a powerless building. It all seemed to fit the image of a kingpin who had just brought in a shipment of heroin from France or Vietnam. The taxi driver, harshly interrogated, couldn't calm the agent's imagination. In those years, airport security was almost non-existent. Couriers moved drugs in hand luggage with little difficulty. Convinced they were about to make a major bust, they requested a search warrant. The judge, impressed by the surveillance report, granted it without hesitation. But when they entered the apartment, they found no labs or shipments, only dirty clothes, documents, and $50,000 in cash. 8 months of investigation, hundreds of hours of surveillance, and all they found was the butt of a joint left in the bathroom. For Barnes, the whole operation was pathetic. In his memoirs, he mocked the agents. "They spent so much time and money following me that in the end, they had to invent something just to prove to their bosses they weren't useless." The reality was more unsettling. From then on, Barnes became the center of an invisible siege. Wiretapped calls, unmarked cars parked outside his home 24/7, a network of street informants. Every move, every whisper was observed. But Nicky didn't flinch. He kept driving his Maserati, living in luxury penthouses, and declaring ridiculously low annual income. Barely $330,000. If you drive a $200,000 car and declare an office clerk's salary, don't be surprised when the IRS comes knocking. Barnes, however, seemed more concerned with laundering money than with drug laws or the agents on his trail. In the eyes of many, he was still Mr. Untouchable. But the pressure was starting to crack his perfect world. Barnes had learned a lesson from history. He didn't want to end up like Al Capone, a victim of the tax machine. With the help of his lawyer, he devised a plan to make the tax system work for him. Through the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, an agency created by Franklin D. Roosevelt to provide affordable housing, Barnes began investing in real estate projects, residential complexes, entire buildings. Each project was a perfect front to launder millions in cash. He even enjoyed tax benefits. During construction, he received a 50% tax abatement. In his moments of daydreaming, Barnes planned to go further. He wrote in his memoirs, "My dream was to build a giant shopping mall in Harlem and a nationwide chain of automated car washes. That would have turned me from a trafficker into a respectable businessman overnight." But there was another problem: the constant flow of cash. To solve it, he turned to an unlikely source: the local church he attended with his wife. The pastor agreed to hold his money in the parish endowment fund in exchange for a 2% commission. A high price, but with an invaluable benefit. Whenever Barnes needed to post bail, no judge questioned the origin of the money. The church's reputation was untouchable. But even his elaborate financial tricks didn't always work. On the 11th of May 1974, Barnes was arrested by police on suspicion of murder. The judge set bail at $100,000. The next day, the church reverend presented the full amount. But Bronx District Attorney Mario Merola was not impressed. He convinced the judge to reject the payment and keep Barnes behind bars. Prosecutor Mario Merola wasn't content with just keeping Nicky Barnes locked up. He got the judge to hold a hearing to question where the local church had come up with the $100,000 bail money. The rector, nervous, explained that it came from parish funds. But the financial records told another story. At the time of Barnes's arrest, the church account held only $330. Bail was denied. For nearly 2 months, Barnes's legal team fought for his release. Finally, his lawyer presented the required sum, claiming it came from his real estate investments. Mr. Untouchable was free again, but the press wouldn't let go of the story. The episode not only damaged his reputation, it also exposed his money laundering network and gave prosecutors new threads to pull. Aware that media and police attention made his usual meetings impossible, Barnes sent Guy Fisher as emissary to Matthew Madonna. But the relationship soured from the start. According to Madonna, Fisher failed to show proper respect. The conflict escalated when Fisher clashed with 2 of his small-time dealers. After being arrested and forced to hand over their money and merchandise to the police, Fisher took it as a personal insult and, in a fit of rage, executed them in cold blood. This broke the rules of the council. The execution of anyone could only be decided unanimously and collectively. Fisher had acted on his own, defying the authority of the group. On the 30th of September 1974, Guy Fisher was on his way to a meeting with Madonna to receive the keys to a car loaded with heroin. He carried $100,000 in cash, but along the way, he committed a traffic violation. Stopped by the police, he presented a fake driver's license. The officers, growing suspicious, searched the vehicle and found the money. Fisher, desperate, tried to bribe them. He was arrested on the spot and charged with attempted bribery. The money was confiscated, and Barnes was forced to cover the debt with Madonna. Internal tensions within the council were growing. Fisher's arrogance and impulsive decisions were beginning to cost the entire organization dearly. Barnes managed to get Fisher out of jail and settle the debt with Matthew Madonna. But when Fisher paid him back, $5,000 was missing. A small amount for an empire generating millions, but enough for Nicky to start doubting. Still, at that moment, he dismissed his suspicions. More urgent problems loomed. Guy Fisher, eager to leave street life behind, dreamed of becoming a respectable businessman. While Barnes devised calculated investment plans, Fisher became obsessed with buying the Apollo Theater. The Apollo had once been a temple of African American music in the 20th century, but in the 1970s it languished in neglect. Fisher saw in its acquisition not just a business, but a symbol, the cultural rebirth of Harlem. The theater was up for auction for just $500,000 and offered attractive tax benefits as a historic landmark. For Fisher, it was the perfect opportunity. For Barnes, an unnecessary risk. While the council debated the future of the Apollo, a far greater crisis struck the organization in 1976. They lost their main supplier, Matthew Madonna. Suddenly, the supply chain that sustained their empire was broken. Desperate to maintain the heroin flow, one member recommended a new supplier, a Mexican named Bonito Cortina. Barnes authorized the purchase of a first shipment for $250,000. But the product turned out to be a disaster. Far from the purity of Marseille's Snow White, the Mexican heroin was a brown, earthy tone, of inferior quality, and nearly impossible to sell without further refinement. The legendary standard of quality that had set Barnes apart was beginning to crack. And with it, the loyalty of Harlem's small dealers and customers. The council, desperate to keep the empire afloat, had no choice but to buy the Mexican heroin. Barnes's subordinates spent weeks processing the product, trying to turn those dark lumps into white powder. But on the streets, the reputation of Barnes's quality brand was starting to crumble. Meanwhile, court cases were piling up. Guy Fisher was sentenced to 1 year in prison for his attempted bribery. Soon after, it was Barnes's turn. 3 years had passed since the raid on his apartment, but the prosecution managed to bring the case to trial. The star evidence: sniffer dogs. According to prosecutors, the dogs barked in the garage where Barnes kept his cars and in his apartment, proving that drugs had been stored there. To impress the jury, prosecutors brought in 2 boxes, one with heroin and one empty. The dogs reacted by barking at the box containing the drugs. Barnes's lawyer, shrewd, requested the boxes be removed and brought in his own. When he placed them before the dogs, they barked just as furiously. The contents: simple aspirin tablets. Once again, Mr. Untouchable made the justice system look foolish. That night, Barnes dined with his lawyer at an Italian restaurant, convinced he had won another battle. But the celebration was premature. The Mexican heroin was still not selling well, and the organization was faltering. In a desperate attempt, Joseph Hayden claimed to have found a miracle supplier, a certain Louis D., capable of obtaining anything from a Sherman tank to tons of heroin at ridiculously low prices. Without consulting the council, Hayden advanced payment for 2 kilos of heroin. For Barnes, this was the last straw. Advancing money to a stranger? Are you crazy? Determined to handle the situation personally, Barnes drove to the meeting with Louis D. But it was a trap. On the night of the 15th of March 1977, police arrested Barnes, Hayden, Fisher still on probation, and several other council members. More than $30 million in cash was seized. It was the largest financial blow to the organization to date. The judge set bail at $300,000. Barnes, still confident, paid and attended meetings with his lawyer to plan his defense. But this time, the tide was against him. Barnes's downfall was accelerated thanks to one man, Luis Diaz. An undercover DI agent, Diaz had spent years infiltrating mafia families, selling small amounts of drugs to maintain his cover. That's how he managed to get close to one of Joseph Hayden's associates, and eventually Hayden himself. What Barnes didn't know was that his men, eager to show autonomy and initiative, had confided in Diaz crucial details about the structure of the organization. Every conversation, every secret, became ammunition for the prosecution. As the net closed around him, Barnes received an unexpected call from New York Times Magazine editor-in-chief Fred Ferretti. They wanted to feature him in an article titled, "Mr. Untouchable." They even offered him the chance to pose for the cover. Barnes's lawyer rejected the proposal. With the trial only months away, it was unwise to draw more attention. But the magazine insisted. If Barnes refused, they would use a mugshot taken the night of his arrest. Barnes, always mindful of his image, relented. He knew potential jurors would see the magazine, and he preferred to be viewed as an elegant citizen rather than a handcuffed criminal. He chose a light denim suit, with a red, white, and blue tie, and posed with his hands crossed, projecting modesty and dignity. On the 5th of June 1977, the cover was released. The headline was a direct challenge. "This is Nicky Barnes. Police say he may be Harlem's biggest drug dealer, but can they prove it?" Every morning, President Jimmy Carter began his day by reading the press. Upon seeing the cover, he reportedly muttered angrily, "If we can't arrest this man, something is very wrong with our justice system." That day, the U.S. Attorney General received a direct order: use all available resources to bring down Mr. Untouchable. The hunt had begun. It was no longer just an investigation. It was a presidential crusade. Jimmy Carter's order was clear: use every means necessary to lock up Mr. Untouchable. Months later, the verdict came down like a hammer: life in prison without parole. To ensure the safety of the process, the court took unprecedented measures. The jury, composed of 15 people, was the first in U.S. history to remain completely anonymous. Their names, addresses, ages, and professions were sealed. The Untouchable had fallen, or so it seemed. At first, from prison, Barnes received only good news about his organization. But slowly, rumors seeped through the bars. The council was falling apart. Guy Fisher had abandoned the purchase of the Apollo Theater, the symbol of his dreams of respectability. And then, the bad news became personal. During a conjugal visit, his wife Nita confessed to having seen Fisher at a basketball game, accompanied by Shemika, Barnes's mistress. The betrayal was unthinkable. The council's rules were clear: no relationships with other members' wives or mistresses. The penalty? Death. Barnes, still without proof, confronted Shemika in the prison visiting room. She denied everything. "Nothing happened between Guy and me, Nicky." Momentarily calmed, Barnes let the matter rest. But 6 months later in prison, he met JJ, a member of Fisher's crew. JJ told him a story that confirmed his worst suspicions. During his 3 years in prison, Guy Fisher had never visited him. Another member, Bob, had been released on parole and demanded the money the council was supposed to pay him for each week in prison. Fisher refused. Worse, Bob's girlfriend had become Guy's new mistress. With a small bribe, Barnes obtained definitive proof: photos of Shemika and Fisher together, at dinners, at events, even kissing. For Nicky Barnes, the betrayal wasn't just personal. It was the sign that the code he had imposed was dead. The council he had built had turned into a nest of snakes. At that moment, Mr. Untouchable made a radical decision: if they turned their backs on him, he would do the same. Barnes was ready to become the government's star witness against his former brothers in arms. From the prison break room, Barnes made several calls to former subordinates. The reality he uncovered was devastating. Heroin suppliers refused to work with the council because Guy Fisher failed to pay on time. The quality of the product had plummeted, and the small dealers couldn't sell it. Even his own lawyers had stopped receiving payments. But the final confirmation came in an envelope. Inside were photos of Shemika and Fisher, dining, at a basketball game, and in one, kissing. Alongside the images was an anonymous note with 5 words that changed everything. From the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. For years, Barnes had rejected offers to cooperate with the authorities. He had always answered with a firm, proud no. But this time, everything was different. He felt betrayed, abandoned, humiliated. As one journalist put it, Mr. Untouchable had become Mr. Tell-all. On the 4th of January 1983, Barnes appeared before a grand jury and revealed every crime committed by the council since 1973. He admitted charges of drug trafficking and his role in 4 murders. His testimony triggered a wave of arrests, including that of Guy Fisher on the 10th of March of that year. In August 1998, Nicky Barnes was released from prison at the age of 64, thanks to the intervention of Attorney General Rudolph Giuliani, who succeeded in overturning his life sentence. From then on, Barnes lived under the Witness Protection Program, hidden somewhere in the Midwest. On the 18th of June 2012, Leroy Nicky Barnes died of cancer. His death remained secret until the summer of 2019. The story of Mr. Untouchable is not a fable with a moral. Born in a Harlem without opportunities, forged in violence and addiction, Barnes never truly had another life to aspire to. He inspires neither horror nor pity. He was as unique as Harlem in the 1970s, a world that no longer exists. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of ambition, betrayal, and power. If this story impacted you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss upcoming accounts of real crimes that shaped history. Mr. Untouchable. One man, one myth, one inevitable end.